Some mornings feel wrong before the sun even rises. You wake up and the air already knows something you don't. That's how it was that day. The coffee smelled the same, the clock ticked the same, yet every sound in that house carried a different echo, like it was warning me that peace was about to end. My name's Robert Hayes, 69, retired carpenter, widower. For 3 years I'd lived with my son Ethan and his wife Lydia in their big suburban home. After my wife Margaret passed, Ethan insisted, "Come live with us, Dad. You'll never be alone again." He meant well, at least back then. Lydia smiled sweetly and called me Dad too. I fixed the porch, repaired the fence, even built a play table for their kids. I believed I still had a place. But comfort fades quietly, like the last light after sunset. That morning I walked into the kitchen and instantly felt it. Lydia was there, dressed too perfectly for a regular Tuesday, phone face down on the counter. Ethan sat beside her with a newspaper he wasn't reading. His eyes flicked toward me, then away. "Good morning," I said, forcing warmth into my voice. No reply, just the hum of the refrigerator. Finally Lydia looked up, lips pressed into that polite curve she used when she wanted to sound reasonable. "Robert," she began softly, "we need to talk about living arrangements." I set down my mug. "Living arrangements?" She clasped her manicured hands. "You've been here quite a while. The children are older now, they need privacy. And Ethan and we'd like our own space. I'm sure you understand." Ethan stayed silent, pretending to find an interesting article about the economy. I studied his face, the same face I once saw crying when he broke his first toy. Now it wouldn't even lift to meet mine. "I thought this was my home," I said quietly. Lydia's smile didn't reach her eyes. "It was, and we've been grateful. But things change. You don't contribute much anymore, financially, I mean, and, well, it's getting tight." That last part stung more than I'd admit. I'd worked 45 years building homes for other people, saving every dime so Ethan could go to college. And now I was a burden in my own son's house. "Ethan," I said, hoping he'd stop her. He shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, maybe just for a while, until we figure things out." A long silence filled the room. I nodded slowly. "I see. Well, no need to argue. I'll start looking." Lydia exhaled with visible relief. "That's very considerate of you." Considerate, as if being unwanted politely made it hurt less. That night I sat in my shed, the only corner of that property that still smelled like me. The wood shavings, the oil, the faint scent of sawdust, they were my church. Every tool had a memory. The hammer I used to build our first home, the chisel that shaped Ethan's crib. Now all of it felt like relics from a life no one wanted to remember. I packed in silence. A few shirts, my late wife's photo, and an old wooden box I'd built decades ago, my rainy day savings. Years of small, careful deposits. Lydia had no idea I even had it. Old carpenters rarely waste money. We save it like sawdust, one speck at a time. I didn't sleep. I watched dawn creep through the cracks, painting everything gold, the same color as the wedding ring I still wore. By noon Ethan helped me load my boxes into the truck. He looked nervous, guilty even. "Dad, it's not forever," he said. "Lydia just needs." I stopped him with a raised hand. "Son, you don't have to explain silence. It already speaks loud enough." He looked away, jaw tight. "You'll call, right?" Of course, I lied. I drove off slowly. In the rearview mirror, Lydia stood on the porch pretending to wave. I wondered if she was relieved because I was leaving or because I wasn't angry. Maybe both. For the first time in my life, I didn't know where I'd end up, but the road ahead didn't scare me. It felt strangely free. I found a small room behind an old diner on Maple Avenue. The bed creaked, the heater groaned, but the window looked out onto the sunset. Each evening, golden light flooded the walls, a reminder that beauty doesn't need permission to exist. Still, when I tried to sleep, Lydia's words replayed in my head. "You don't contribute anymore." She measured worth in money, not in years of love or labor. But I knew different. A man's value is in what he builds, and I still had one more thing left to build. One afternoon, while driving past Ethan's neighborhood, I saw a red sign staked into the lawn across from their house. "For sale, by owner." I slowed the truck. The house was almost identical. Same porch, same maple tree, even the same style of shutters. Except this one looked empty, neglected, forgotten, like it was waiting for someone who understood what home truly meant. I pulled over, stared at it for a long minute, then dialed the number. "Funny," said the real estate agent. "This place has been sitting for months. Needs a little work. You interested?" I looked across the street, straight at Ethan's roof, barely visible behind the hedges. A smile tugged at my lips. You could say that. That night, for the first time since leaving, I slept without bitterness. Not because I forgave them, not yet, but because I'd found something better than revenge, resolve. They drew their boundary when they told me I didn't belong. Now I draw mine, across the street, in brick and timber, with my own hands. Close enough for them to see the lights of a man they dismissed still shining through their window. And maybe, just maybe, every time Lydia looked out and saw me on that porch, she'd remember that some men don't shout to be heard. They build their silence into something permanent. The wind had changed that day, but this time, it blew in my direction. 3 weeks later, the moving truck rolled into Maple Grove Avenue again. The same street that had watched me leave in silence was now watching me return. Quietly, steadily, like the tide coming back to claim the shore. The house across from Ethan's looked worse than I remembered. Paint peeling, steps cracked, weeds curling through the walkway. But when I unlocked the front door, it creaked like an old friend sighing in relief. The air inside smelled of dust and wood, two things I'd always known how to handle. I set my toolbox down, took a deep breath, and said aloud, "Let's bring you back to life." For the next week, I worked from sunrise till the streetlights flickered on. My hands ached, my back screamed, but my heart finally felt useful again. Every nail I drove, every board I replaced whispered something I hadn't heard in a long time. You still matter. Neighbors began to notice. Some waved, others peeked curiously from behind curtains. And then, one afternoon, a familiar car slowed down near my driveway. Lydia. She wasn't smiling this time. Her window rolled down halfway. "Robert," she said, her voice caught between disbelief and irritation. I wiped the sweat from my brow. "Afternoon, Lydia. What are you doing here?" "Fixing up my new home," I answered, nodding toward the house. Her jaw tightened. "Here? Across the street? Convenient, isn't it?" I said softly. "Family nearby." She didn't reply, just pressed her lips together, muttered something under her breath, and drove away. I watched the car disappear into their driveway. Through the trees, I could almost see her storming inside to tell Ethan. That night, their porch light stayed off. Days passed, and the house slowly transformed. Fresh paint turned the dull gray walls into warm cedar brown. I built a small porch swing, the same kind I'd made for Ethan when he was little. Every creak of the chain felt like memory stitching itself back together. Kids from the neighborhood started dropping by, fascinated by the old man who builds things. I taught them how to sand wood and measure twice before cutting once. Their laughter filled the yard, a sound I hadn't heard since my grandchildren stopped visiting. On the 5th evening, as the sun melted behind the rooftops, Ethan walked across the street, hands in his pockets, nervous as a boy about to confess a secret. "Dad," he started, "you bought this place?" I did. He looked around, eyes softening despite himself. "It looks nice. Still needs work. But it's mine." He hesitated. Lydia's a little surprised. I noticed. He sighed. "You didn't do this to what? Get back at her?" I interrupted gently. "No, son. I did this to remind myself I'm not finished yet." He nodded slowly, guilt flickering across his face. "The kids miss you." "I miss them too," I said. "They can visit whenever they want. My door's open." "Lydia might not. She'll come around," I said. "Or she won't. Either way, I'll still be here." Ethan gave a small nod, then turned back toward his house. I watched him go, a grown man who still didn't know how to stand between two truths. That night, I sat on the new porch swing, sipping tea as the wind rustled through the maples. Across the street, their curtains shifted. A shadow moved, Lydia, watching. I didn't wave. I just let the porch light glow a little brighter. Every evening after that, I made it a ritual. I'd sit there quietly, lamp glowing behind me, the sound of wood creaking softly beneath my feet. Not out of spite, but because peace, when claimed calmly, is louder than anger. Soon, word spread that the old man across from the Hayeses fixed things for free. Broken fence. Done. Loose hinge. Repaired before dawn. I wasn't trying to be noticed, but Lydia noticed anyway. Every thank you from a neighbor was a reminder of the respect she'd refused to give. One afternoon, while I was repainting the front fence, her youngest, little Sophie, ran across the street holding a drawing. "Grandpa Robert, Mommy said you live here now." I smiled, kneeling down. "That's right, sweetheart." She handed me the picture. A house, 2 stick figures, and a big yellow sun. "This is you and me. Daddy said we can visit sometimes." Before I could answer, Lydia's voice cut through the air. "Sophie, come back now." The girl hesitated, then ran back. Lydia took her by the arm and didn't even glance my way. But Sophie turned once more, waving the paper in the wind. That small gesture, that innocent wave, burned deeper than any insult Lydia could ever throw. As evening settled, I hung Sophie's drawing on the inside of my door. The house felt warmer instantly. Across the street, their curtains were closed again, lights dimmed early. They thought pushing me out would erase me. Instead, they'd just given me a front-row seat to their own reflection. And as I sat beneath the porch light that night, I realized something simple yet powerful. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it just moves in next door. You can tell a lot about a person by the way they greet their neighbors. Lydia had once smiled at everyone, bright, rehearsed, sugary. But lately her waves were shorter, her tone sharper. It wasn't that people had changed. It was that I had returned. Each morning I'd step onto my porch with a mug of coffee, greeting the mailman, chatting with Mrs. Harper from 2 doors down. I fixed her mailbox one morning before breakfast, just a couple of screws and a drop of oil, and by evening, half the street knew. The next day, old Mr. Collins came by, asking if I could take a look at his fence. Then the Thompsons. Then the Parkers. It didn't take long before everyone on Maple Grove started saying the same thing. "That Robert, he's a real gentleman." And Lydia heard every word of it. One Saturday morning, I was replanting roses along the edge of the walkway when a familiar voice called from behind me. "Dad, you're making quite a name for yourself here." Ethan stood there with his hands in his pockets, that half-sheepish grin I remembered from his teenage years. "Good morning, son," I said, standing up slowly. "Coffee?" He shook his head. "I can't stay long. Lydia's with the kids at dance class." "Ah," I said lightly. "Then this is one of those secret visits." He smiled faintly. "She's just confused. You know how she can be." "Confused," I repeated. "That's one word for it." He looked down. "She thinks you moved here to make her look bad." I leaned on the shovel, studying his face. "I didn't move here to make her look bad. I moved here because she made me feel invisible." He exhaled. "I wish you two could get along." "So do I, son. But bridges only hold when both sides build." Later that afternoon, while I was fixing a neighbor's gate, I caught a glimpse of Lydia across the street, watering her flowers with unnecessary force. Every few minutes her eyes flicked toward me, then away. Mrs. Harper waved at me from her porch. "Robert, that fence looks better than new." "Happy to help," I said, smiling. Lydia's hand froze midair. The water hose bent, spraying her shoe. She cursed softly, then went back inside. Within a week, the transformation was complete. The abandoned house had become the warmest corner of the street. Kids played near my yard. Neighbors gathered for coffee on the weekends. Someone even brought a pie with a note. "Welcome home, Mr. Hayes." Across the road, Lydia's house grew quieter. Curtains drawn, cars in the driveway, but no laughter spilling from the porch anymore. One evening, as I sat outside whittling a piece of oak, I heard muffled voices drifting across the street, Lydia's sharp tones slicing through the still air. "He's doing it on purpose, Ethan. Everyone's talking about him." "Lydia, he's just living his life," Ethan replied. "Living his life? He's humiliating me. The neighbors think I threw him out like garbage." I set the carving knife down, staring at the sunset as if it were a TV screen. The words reached me, clear as confession. Maybe I had embarrassed her, not by revenge, but by being better than the story she told about me. That night, while sweeping my porch, little Sophie ran over again, barefoot and giggling. "Grandpa Robert, Mommy said not to come, but I wanted to show you my school star." She held up a golden sticker. I crouched, smiling. "That's beautiful. You worked hard for it, huh?" She nodded proudly. "Daddy said you used to build houses. Can you build a treehouse?" I laughed softly. "For you? Of course. But we'll have to ask Mommy first." "She'll say no," Sophie said matter-of-factly, "but I'll tell her anyway." Then she hugged my leg before darting back home. From her porch, Lydia stood stiff as marble. I nodded politely. She didn't return it. A few days later, I began gathering scrap wood for that treehouse. Not to provoke her, but because a promise to a child deserves to be kept. Soon, the sound of hammering echoed across the street. Tap, tap, tap. Rhythmic, calm, persistent. Neighbors stopped to watch. For your granddaughter? Someone asked. For whoever believes in small things, I said with a wink. By evening, the frame stood proud between two sturdy maples. Lydia watched from her window, arms crossed, face unreadable. That night, Ethan came again. Dad, maybe you should stop. Stop what? The treehouse. Lydia says it's inappropriate. It makes her uncomfortable. I smiled faintly. Then she should close the curtains. He didn't know what to say. I could tell he was torn, a man balanced between peace and pride. Ethan, I said quietly, you can't live your whole life apologizing for someone else's discomfort. Someday you'll learn that. He looked down, then turned away, shoulders heavy. When he left, I sat beneath the unfinished treehouse, the scent of fresh pine around me. The night air carried the hum of crickets, and across the street, Lydia's windows glowed dimly. She'd wanted me gone, erased, forgotten. Instead, I'd become the story whispered on every porch, the man who rebuilt his dignity across the street. And as the moon climbed high above Maple Grove, I realized that revenge doesn't always require rage or fire. Sometimes it only needs wood, patience, and a little light that refuses to go out. There's something strange about silence. It's heavy, but soft, like snow before it falls. And on Maple Grove Avenue, silence began to gather around Lydia's house like frost. The woman who once waved from her porch every morning now rarely came outside. Her flowers, once trimmed and perfect, started to wilt. Her laughter, the one she used to flaunt for neighbors, had vanished completely. But gossip? That never dies quietly. It started with whispers. Mrs. Harper told the mailman she couldn't believe Ethan's father had been asked to leave. Then Mr. Collins added, and yet look at him now, fixing fences, helping kids, always polite. By Sunday, even the pastor's wife was saying, sometimes God balances things without our help. I didn't intend any of it. Truly, all I did was live the life they said I no longer deserved. That weekend, I was sanding the railing on my porch when Lydia finally approached. She looked different, not angry this time, just brittle, a crack in her perfect armor. Robert, she began, arms crossed tightly. We need to talk. I set the sander down. Of course. I'd appreciate it, she said slowly, if you stopped interfering. With Ethan, with the neighbors, with everything. I tilted my head. Interfering? Helping a few people is interfering? Her voice sharpened. You know what I mean. Everyone's talking like you're some kind of saint, and I waited. She didn't finish. And you're embarrassed by that, I said gently. Lydia's cheeks flushed. I'm angry. You made me look like. I didn't make you look like anything, I interrupted. I just stopped trying to look small. Her mouth opened, but no words came. She turned on her heel and stormed away. For a moment, I felt pity. But pity fades fast when you remember the nights you ate dinner alone in a shed behind someone else's house. Later that evening, Ethan came by again, this time alone, without excuses. He looked exhausted. Dad, she's falling apart. She says people judge her. The kids told her their teacher asked why Grandpa doesn't live with them anymore. I sighed. Kids ask questions when adults give confusing answers. He rubbed his temples. She thinks you're doing this to humiliate her. I don't need to humiliate anyone, son, I said quietly. Life does that on its own when pride gets in the way. He nodded slowly. You're different now. I'm free now, I said. There's a difference. Days turned into weeks. The neighborhood's attention shifted entirely. People came to me for advice, repairs, even just conversation. I didn't ask for respect. I earned it the old-fashioned way, with hands, honesty, and time. Meanwhile, Lydia's isolation grew louder. She'd walk the kids to the car, head down, sunglasses on even when it was cloudy. Her friends stopped visiting. Her garden died. But the worst blow came from her own children. One afternoon, I was finishing Sophie's treehouse when I heard little footsteps behind me. Grandpa Robert, she said softly, Mommy cried last night. I looked down at her. Why, sweetheart? She said everyone likes you more than her. I knelt, resting a hand on her shoulder. Sometimes grown-ups forget that kindness doesn't compete. It just grows. She nodded solemnly. Can we plant flowers here? Mommies are all brown now. I smiled. Yes. Let's plant some for her too. That small act, 2 flower beds, one for Sophie and one for Mommy, spread faster than rumor. By the next week, half the neighborhood had offered seedlings, shovels, or help. Everyone wanted to take part in Mr. Hayes' kindness garden. Even the local newspaper sent a young journalist to take photos. Mind if we do a story, sir? He asked. It's rare to see someone your age building things for the whole community. I shrugged modestly. I'm just fixing what's broken. When the article came out, Lydia's name wasn't mentioned, but the photo said everything. Me, standing in front of the newly painted house, kids laughing behind me, flowers blooming in the background. Across the street, her porch stood empty, blinds closed. That night, I sat on my swing under the soft amber light, the newspaper folded on my lap. Across the street, I saw her silhouette in the window. Still, unmoving, watching. She'd wanted me invisible. Now, no matter where she turned, she saw me, not out of vengeance, but because she couldn't escape the reflection of her own choices. The irony was gentle, almost poetic. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't take revenge in anger. I just lived better than she thought I could. And that, I realized, was the loudest revenge of all. But peace never stays forever. One evening, Ethan called, his voice trembling. Dad, Lydia found the article. She's furious. Says she won't stay here anymore. I sighed deeply. And what about you, son? There was a pause. Then, I don't know. As the phone clicked off, I looked across the street at their darkened windows. The silence there wasn't just anger anymore. It was fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of truth. Fear of watching dignity bloom where cruelty once grew. And for the first time, I wondered if my quiet revenge had gone too far. The day it happened started like any other, calm, blue-skied, harmless. If someone had told me that by evening half the neighborhood would be standing outside, watching my daughter-in-law scream across the street, I wouldn't have believed it. But storms don't always start with thunder. Sometimes, they begin with a whisper. I was sanding the last edge of the treehouse when I heard my name called sharply. Robert. Lydia's voice, loud, brittle, and full of something that had been building for months. She was standing in her driveway, arms stiff, her face pale with fury. Ethan trailed behind her, looking helpless. I set the sandpaper down and walked to the fence. Morning, Lydia. Don't morning me, she snapped. I'm done pretending this is normal. I looked around. Several neighbors paused mid-step. Mrs. Harper froze with her mail. A few kids stopped riding their bikes. Lydia didn't care. Her anger had found its audience. You've made a mockery of me, she said, voice trembling. Everyone's talking about you, about how poor Robert Hayes was thrown out by his cruel daughter-in-law. You planned this. You moved here just to ruin me. I shook my head slowly. I didn't plan anything, Lydia. I simply bought a house. Her laugh came out sharp. Oh, spare me the saint act. You're playing the victim, turning everyone against me. Even the paper made you look like some kind of hero. Ethan reached for her arm. Lydia, please. She pulled away. No, he needs to hear this. Her eyes burned with something I recognized. Not just anger, but humiliation. It wasn't me she hated. It was the mirror I'd become. Do you even realize what you've done to my family? She shouted. The kids come home asking why Grandpa doesn't live with us. Why we don't visit. You've poisoned them against me. I took a deep breath, my voice calm. No, Lydia. Children see truth without needing it explained. That silence that followed was heavy, the kind that breaks glass from the inside. Her lips quivered. You think you're better than me? Some poor, lonely old man who can't stand being forgotten? Not better, I said quietly. Just someone who stopped asking for permission to exist. Her fury cracked then. She threw her gardening gloves to the ground, turned to Ethan, and hissed. If you don't make him stop, I will. And then she walked off, across her own yard, across her pride, slamming the door behind her with a sound that echoed through the entire street. Neighbors slowly dispersed, pretending not to have watched. But they had. Everyone had. Ethan stayed, standing on the curb like a man split in two. He started, then stopped. She's not herself lately. She's exactly herself, I said softly. That's the problem. He rubbed his face. I don't know how to fix this. You can't fix people who think love is ownership, I said. All you can do is choose who you'll be when the noise stops. He looked at me for a long time, maybe seeing something in my eyes that scared him, or maybe something that reminded him of who he used to be. Then he just whispered, "I'll call you later," and left. That night, Maple Grove was quiet again, but not peacefully quiet. The kind of quiet that follows after something breaks. Through my window, I saw their lights flicker on and off, shadows pacing. At one point, I saw Lydia standing at her kitchen sink, motionless, staring out. Our eyes met through the glass for the first time without words. And I realized, sometimes silence isn't peace. It's surrender. The next morning, things changed. Ethan came alone, dark circles under his eyes. He looked older than he should have. "She's gone," he said simply. I blinked. "Gone?" She packed the kids, went to her sister's for a while. Said she needs space. I nodded slowly, unsure whether to feel relief or sadness. "I didn't stop her," he continued. "I didn't have the strength to keep pretending everything's fine." We sat on my porch, two men sharing the same weight of a broken home in silence. "I didn't want this, son," I finally said. "I never wanted to destroy your family." "I know," he said quietly, "but maybe it was already cracked. You just made us see it." Later that evening, as the sun began to set, I stood outside, looking across at their empty house. No laughter, no porch light, no flowers being watered. Just quiet windows staring back like eyes that finally ran out of tears. I thought about Lydia, her pride, her fear, her need for control. And somewhere deep down, I felt a trace of pity. Because revenge, no matter how calm, leaves ashes behind, even when you never meant to burn anything. Still, I couldn't deny the truth. I hadn't planned to ruin her life. I'd simply built mine too close for her to ignore. And sometimes, that's enough to break even the strongest facade. But something in my gut told me this wasn't the end. Lydia wasn't the kind to disappear quietly. And the storm that had raged in her eyes that morning, it hadn't died. It was just moving somewhere else, waiting to strike again. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat on my porch swing, and whispered to the wind, "Let it come. I've weathered worse." For nearly 2 months, the house across the street stayed dark. No porch lights, no laughter, no shouting. Just emptiness. A hollow shell where pride used to live. I told myself I didn't care, that it was peace. But every night, when I turned off my lamp, my eyes wandered across that silent yard, half expecting a shadow to move behind those windows. Then one morning, it happened. A silver SUV pulled into their driveway. The doors opened. Luggage, boxes, children's toys. Lydia was back. She stepped out dressed like she was going to war. Hair sharp, posture perfect, chin high. Her expression didn't show guilt, only strategy. Ethan followed behind, slower, eyes tired, shoulders slumped. The kids ran inside, their laughter cutting through the stale air like sunlight through dust. The street felt alive again, but not in a good way. That afternoon, while I was raking leaves, I saw her crossing toward me. Not fast, not slow, just deliberate. "Morning," I said carefully. She smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Robert, back for good." "For now," she said. "Things were complicated, but I've had time to think." "I see." She looked around, taking in my freshly painted fence, the neat flower beds, the porch swing. "You've made quite a name for yourself here. Everyone adores you." I didn't reply. Her eyes flicked up to mine. "Must feel good, doesn't it? Being the hero." "I'm just living my life," I said quietly. Her lips twitched. "Sure, let's keep it that way." She turned and walked off, heels clicking against the pavement. The wind carried her perfume across the fence, the same scent that once filled my son's house. It smelled like expensive roses and cold intent. Days passed. She didn't shout anymore, didn't glare. Instead, she started smiling to the neighbors again, waving, handing out cookies with the kids. People noticed. Some even whispered that she was trying to make amends. But I knew better. People don't change overnight, they adapt. One morning, I caught her husband and children in the yard, watching her hang decorations for a neighborhood welcome party. Banners, balloons, pastries, the works. And right in the middle of the table, a neatly written sign. Hosted by the Hayes family, across from Mr. Robert Hayes. A performance. A perfect act of public reconciliation. That evening, she came over again, holding 2 paper invitations. "You're invited, of course," she said. her tone sugary. It's important that people see we're family again. I took the card but didn't open it. Family again? Her eyes hardened behind the smile. Appearances matter, Robert. I'm sure you of all people understand that. Then she leaned closer, lowering her voice. You had your moment. Everyone loves your little redemption story. Now it's time you fade back into the background, before people start seeing you differently. I met her stare. Calm. Cold. You can't control what people see anymore, Lydia. Not even when they look at you. Her mask slipped for half a second, just enough for me to glimpse the storm still swirling behind her calm expression. Enjoy the party, she said flatly, turning away. That night, I sat on my porch, turning the invitation over and over in my hand. I knew what this was. A stage. She wasn't trying to fix anything. She wanted to reclaim her image, rebuild her pride on my silence. But silence had already served me once. This time, it felt different. This time, maybe it was time to speak. The next day, I spent the morning cleaning my porch swing, trimming the garden, polishing the small plaque above my door that read Hayes Workshop since 1983. Then I walked across the street, knocked on their door, and said, I'll be there. Her eyes flickered with surprise. Good. Let's keep it civil. Oh, I said with a faint smile. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The night of the party came quickly. Lanterns glowed across their yard. Music played, people laughed, kids ran with sparklers. Lydia stood in the center of it all, gracious, radiant, playing her role perfectly. When she saw me approach, she raised her glass. Everyone, the man of the hour, my wonderful father-in-law. Polite applause followed. I nodded, smiling faintly, even as I felt the weight of her performance pressing down on me. I mingled quietly, answering neighbors' questions, complimenting their cooking. Lydia stayed close enough to control the narrative, but far enough to keep her distance. Then, as the evening light dimmed, Mrs. Harper said something I'll never forget. You must be proud, Lydia. Not everyone can mend bridges so gracefully. Lydia laughed softly. Oh, it's easy when you're forgiving by nature. Something inside me stirred, not anger, exactly, but a quiet decision. I set down my cup, straightened my back, and said clearly enough for the group to hear. Forgiveness is easy when the person you wronged never demanded an apology. The laughter stopped. Heads turned. Lydia froze. Mrs. Harper blinked. Oh my. Lydia's smile stiffened. Of course. Robert loves to joke. But the silence that followed wasn't laughter. It was realization. And as I looked around at all the eyes shifting toward her, I knew I hadn't needed to raise my voice. Truth had already done it for me. That night, when the guests left and the street was empty again, Lydia stood on her porch alone. She didn't look angry. She looked small. I sat quietly across the street, the porch light between us like a boundary carved in gold. She wanted to fix her image. I had only reminded her that masks eventually crumble. But I also knew this wasn't the end. The calm after confrontation never lasts. And somewhere deep inside, I could feel it. The story wasn't finished. The morning after the party, the air felt heavier than usual. Not angry, just tired, like even the sky had witnessed enough. I was sitting on my porch, sipping tea, when Ethan crossed the street. His steps were slow, uncertain. His eyes looked as though he hadn't slept. He didn't speak right away, just stood there, staring at the ground. Finally, he said, She's gone again. I set my mug down. Gone where? He shrugged. Her sisters. She left last night after everyone went home. Said she needed to breathe. I nodded. Maybe that's for the best. He sighed deeply, rubbing his forehead. Dad, you don't understand. She didn't just leave the house. She left us. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The wind moved through the maple trees, scattering yellow leaves across the street. The same street that had carried so many of our unspoken words. Finally, he whispered, It's my fault. I motioned for him to sit. He did, head in his hands. What do you mean, your fault? I asked quietly. He hesitated, then said, You remember when Mom died? I wasn't there. You called me, but I didn't make it in time. I nodded slowly. That wound had never truly healed. He swallowed hard. I swore I'd never abandon family again. That's why I let Lydia control everything. Why I stayed quiet when she told you to leave. I thought keeping the peace was better than breaking the illusion. His voice cracked, but I broke something anyway. I looked at my son, the boy who used to help me hold nails steady, the young man who once promised to build a better life. And I saw him now, a man crushed by the weight of silence. "Ethan," I said softly, "you didn't fail me. You failed yourself." He looked up, eyes wet. I was scared. She said if I didn't agree, she'd take the kids and leave. And I believed her. She's always had this way of twisting truth until you doubt your own memories. I nodded. People like that build prisons without bars, and they make you thank them for the cell. He gave a small, broken laugh. She said I owed her everything, that I'd be nothing without her. I leaned back. Then maybe her leaving isn't the worst thing that's ever happened. He stared at the horizon for a long time. The neighbors keep asking questions. They think we're getting divorced. "Are you?" I asked. He hesitated. "I don't know. I just know I can't keep living like this." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then stop. You don't owe anyone your silence anymore. Not her, not me, not the world. The hardest thing a man can do is start again. But sometimes that's the only thing worth doing." Ethan wiped his eyes and nodded slowly. "You were right all along, Dad. About everything." I smiled faintly. "No, I was just older long enough to see how time unmasks people." That evening, while Ethan stayed for dinner, I noticed the kids running through the yard, laughing, chasing one another between the maple trees. Sophie pointed at the treehouse, shouting, "That's ours." And in that moment, for the first time in years, my house felt like a home again. After they left, I stepped outside. The moon hung low, brushing pale light across the roofs. I looked at the house across the street, dark again, silent again. But this time, I didn't feel resentment. Only closure. Or so I thought, until I saw the envelope. It was tucked beneath my door frame. No stamp, no name, just one word written in neat cursive, truth. I took it inside, unfolded the paper, and read. "You think you've won, but you don't know everything. Ask your son what really happened before you moved in. Ask him about the money." No signature, no hint, just those words, cutting, cold, perfectly placed. I sat down, heart heavy. The money, my savings. The wooden box I'd built decades ago, the one Lydia never knew about. Except someone had known. Ethan. The next morning, when Ethan returned to help repair a porch beam, I handed him the note. He froze. "Dad, where did you get this?" "Someone left it last night." His hands trembled. "She must have." He stopped, staring at the ground. "No, she's trying to turn you against me." "Then tell me the truth," I said calmly. "What money?" He swallowed hard, guilt flashing in his eyes. "It was years ago, before you moved in. You were still working part-time, saving up for retirement. Mom's old account, remember? You let me handle the taxes." I nodded slowly. "I used some of it," he whispered. "Not much. Just a few thousand. We were behind on the mortgage, and Lydia said it was okay. I told myself I'd pay it back before you noticed. But I didn't. And then when she realized how much you still had, she started seeing you as a problem. Not family. A liability." His voice broke. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I didn't speak for a long time. The clock ticked in the silence like a hammer hitting an empty nail. When I finally did, my voice was calm. "You should have told me." "I know," he said, tears in his eyes. "But I was ashamed." "Shame is just truth that's afraid of daylight," I said quietly. "But it always finds a way through." He left soon after, shoulders bent beneath the weight of what he'd carried for years. And I stood there, looking at the note again. Maybe Lydia was trying to hurt me. Maybe she wanted to destroy what little peace I'd found. But she'd also given me something she never meant to, clarity. Now, I understood everything. The eviction, the manipulation, the resentment. It had never just been about space. It had been about control, money, pride, fear. And somehow, without realizing it, we'd all been trapped in the same house of lies, even after moving apart. But not anymore. Now that the truth was out, the real storm could finally begin. When lies start to rot, they don't disappear quietly, they stink first. And for the next few days, Maple Grove smelled like tension. Lydia's car appeared every other evening now, parked just long enough to drop something off or pick something up. She didn't look at me when she passed, didn't wave, just slammed the door, straightened her shoulders, and marched inside like a soldier entering occupied territory. But I knew she wasn't coming for the kids. She was coming for the truth, or rather, to twist it one last time. Ethan hadn't called since his confession. Part of me understood. Shame has a way of making even good men disappear. But the silence gnawed at me. I wasn't angry that he'd taken the money. I was angry that guilt had turned him into a stranger. One night, around 9 p.m., a knock broke the quiet. I opened the door to find Lydia standing there. No smile, no pretense. "May I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. "If you think you can handle honesty." She walked in slowly, scanning the room. The tools lined neatly, the framed photo of Margaret, the warm yellow light on the wooden walls. "Still smells like sawdust," she said softly. "You really can't change, can you?" "Why would I?" I asked. "It's the only part of me that's still real." She turned toward me, eyes sharp. "I didn't come here to argue. I came to warn you." "Warn me." She crossed her arms. "Ethan told me he confessed. About the money." I said nothing. "I didn't make him do it," she continued quickly. "He did it because he thought it would fix things between you two. But it won't. You'll never see him the same way again." "That's where you're wrong," I said quietly. "I see him more clearly than ever." She stepped closer, her perfume too sweet, her voice too calm. "You think you've won, Robert? You think this little act of yours, this quiet revenge, makes you righteous? You've poisoned him against me, against himself." I met her eyes steadily. "No, you did that when you mistook control for love." For a moment, the mask slipped. Her face hardened, jaw tight, eyes flashing. "You don't understand people like me, do you? We survive by winning. You build houses, I build futures. You think small. That's why I'll always end up ahead." "Maybe," I said softly. "But when you die, you'll be the only one in the room." Her breath hitched, just slightly. Then she smirked. "We'll see about that." And with that, she left, the door closing behind her like a promise. The next day, I saw her outside with a clipboard, walking from door to door, smiling, laughing, pretending. My neighbors waved back, unaware of the knife she was hiding behind her smile. By the third house, I understood what she was doing. She was gathering sympathy, rebuilding the story. The sweet daughter-in-law, the misunderstood wife, the poor woman burdened by a difficult father-in-law. She was preparing a new war. But this time, I wouldn't defend myself. I'd let her words build walls, and I'd quietly remove the foundations beneath them. A few days later, I visited the town office. It wasn't difficult to find the right paperwork. After all, every carpenter knows the value of a title, especially a property title. When Lydia and Ethan first bought their house, they used part of my savings as a down payment. The same savings she'd helped herself to years ago. I still had the proof, the old transfer receipts, the paper trail from my wife's account. I'd never used them, never wanted to. But justice, I realized, doesn't always come from anger. Sometimes it comes from paperwork. It took 3 signatures and 1 notarized statement to file a legal claim, a request to transfer partial ownership recognition for financial contribution. Not enough to take the house, but enough to force her to remember who helped her build her perfect life. I didn't plan to use it as revenge. I just wanted truth to have a written home. That evening, Ethan showed up, pale and tense. "Dad, what did you do?" I handed him a copy of the filing. "I didn't touch your house. I just made sure history remembers who paid for it." He rubbed his face. "Lydia's furious. She says you're trying to humiliate her." "I'm not," I said calmly. "I'm teaching her that actions have paperwork." He groaned softly. "She's threatening to take the kids and leave for good." "Then let her," I said gently. "Maybe that's the best gift she could give them, distance from poison." He stared at me for a long time. "You really think she's poison?" I looked him in the eye. "Son, love that demands silence isn't love. It's a leash." He didn't answer, just nodded slowly, as if the words were carving their way into his bones. The next week, Lydia's charm act collapsed. She stopped smiling at neighbors, stopped coming outside. Word spread that she was furious about a legal betrayal. And then one morning, her car was gone again. This time, she didn't leave an address. Ethan came over later that day, quiet, almost weightless, like someone who had been holding his breath for years and finally exhaled. "She's filed for separation," he said softly. "She took what was hers and left what wasn't." I looked across the street. The curtains fluttered in the open windows. For the first time in a long while, sunlight touched those walls again. "Maybe now," I said, "you can finally start building something worth keeping." He smiled weakly. "With your help, I think I can." That night, as the crickets hummed and the air turned golden under the streetlights, I sat on my porch and watched the quiet stretch across the neighborhood. The storm had passed, not because I fought it, but because I refused to feed it. Lydia had built her world on lies, and when truth finally arrived, it didn't shout or break. It just stood there, unmovable. And for the first time since I left that house, I felt peace. Not victory, not pride, just peace. The kind of peace you earn after surviving a storm you never wanted and building something beautiful from the wreckage. You can tell when peace finally returns. It doesn't knock. It just slips in quietly and makes itself at home. The wind felt softer on Maple Grove Avenue. The evenings were golden again. And for the first time in years, I could walk past my son's house without that sting in my chest. Lydia's car was gone for good now. The curtains were open, the laughter of children echoing through the yard like music. Ethan had started fixing things himself, repainting, replacing, learning. It was clumsy work, but honest. Sometimes he'd cross the street, tool belt awkwardly slung around his waist, and ask, "Dad, how do I get this straight?" I'd grin and say, "Measure twice, cut once." And every time, he'd nod like it was the first time he'd heard it. The kids began visiting more often. Sophie especially, curious, bright, full of questions about everything. She'd sit beside me on the porch swing, feet not quite touching the floor. "Grandpa," she asked one afternoon, "why did Mommy leave?" I paused, watching a leaf drift down from the maple tree. Sometimes, sweetheart, grown-ups forget that love isn't about winning. It's about staying. She thought about that for a moment, then nodded solemnly. "Then I hope Daddy stays." "So do I," said softly. We spent the afternoon painting birdhouses. Sophie picked pink and yellow. "Because birds need happiness," she said. And as we worked, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Ethan began to change too. He no longer flinched when someone mentioned Lydia's name. He talked more, laughed more, started going on morning walks. He even reconnected with old friends he hadn't seen in years. One evening, as we sat outside drinking coffee, he said, "You know, Dad, I used to think strength was keeping quiet. But I realize now, silence just lets the wrong people speak for you." I nodded. "You can't stop storms, son, but you can decide what you'll build after they pass." He smiled faintly. "Like you did." "Exactly," I said. "We don't rebuild for revenge. We rebuild to remember who we are." The neighborhood seemed to embrace him too. Mrs. Harper baked pies for the kids every weekend. Mr. Collins helped Ethan replace his gutters. Everyone seemed relieved, as if Maple Grove itself had taken a deep breath. One Sunday morning, the kids ran across the street carrying something between them, a small wooden sign painted in bright colors. They placed it carefully on my front lawn. It read, "Grandpa's house, where things get fixed." I laughed until my eyes watered. "You made this yourselves?" Sophie nodded proudly. "Daddy helped a little, but it was our idea." Ethan, standing behind them, smiled. "They said you fix everything, even hearts." That one hit deep. I knelt, pulled them both close, and whispered, "Only because mine was broken once too." A few weeks later, I decided it was time to finish something I'd been avoiding. In the back of my workshop, under a dust sheet, sat the old wooden chest, the one that had started this entire story. The box of savings. The symbol of trust and betrayal, of silence and discovery. I opened it slowly. Inside, the envelope with the remaining money still sat untouched. Next to it, a folded photo of Margaret holding baby Ethan, smiling like sunlight. I picked it up, brushing the dust away, and whispered, "You'd be proud of him now." Then I took half the money and placed it in a new envelope, writing in neat, slow letters, "For Ethan's new beginning." I left it on his porch that night without a note. The next morning, he came over holding the envelope, eyes glassy. "Dad, why?" "Because you've already paid the debt," I said. "The rest is just numbers." He shook his head. "You're too good for this world." I smiled. "No, I just lived long enough to realize that forgiveness is the only thing that actually rebuilds." He didn't say anything, just hugged me. And in that quiet, I could almost hear Margaret's voice in the breeze. "You did right, Robert. You taught him what love really looks like." Time moved gently after that. The treehouse Sophie and I built became a local legend. The heart of Maple Grove, the kids called it. Every weekend, laughter filled its wooden frame, the sound echoing through the street like a promise that not all endings are sad. Sometimes I'd sit beneath it at sunset, sipping tea, watching my son chase his children across the yard. The same yard that once divided us now brought us back together. I'd think about Lydia sometimes, wonder where she'd gone, if she ever looked back, if she regretted what she'd lost. But I never wished her harm. I didn't need to. Life had already given her what she feared most: invisibility. One evening, Ethan sat beside me on the swing, staring at the sky. "You know," he said, "when I was a kid, I used to think you were invincible, that nothing could hurt you." I chuckled. "Oh, I broke plenty. I just learned to build again." He smiled. "Then I guess that's what I'll do too." The wind rustled through the maples, carrying laughter and the faint scent of fresh paint. The world felt right again. Not perfect, not easy, but right. I looked across the street one last time. The house that had once been a battlefield now stood silent, peaceful. And I realized something simple yet profound. Revenge may end a story, but rebuilding gives it meaning. Some sunsets feel different. You can tell when one isn't just the end of a day. It's the end of a season, of a story, of a chapter you didn't know you were still writing. That's what this one felt like. The maple trees were glowing with orange fire. The air smelled of pine and warm dust. I sat on my porch swing with a cup of tea, the same way I had every evening for the last few years. But tonight, everything felt still. Perfectly, peacefully still. Across the street, Ethan was on the lawn, helping Sophie hang paper lanterns in the treehouse. The boy, little Adam, chased their dog in circles, his laughter rising like music above the rustle of leaves. Their house, once a battlefield, was alive again. Not with pride, not with perfection, but with warmth. And for the first time since Margaret died, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel in years. Home. When the lanterns were lit, Ethan crossed the street and sat beside me. He didn't say much. He never did when words weren't needed. We watched the lights sway in the evening wind, their soft glow moving like gentle stars. "Kids wanted to light these for you," he said quietly. "Sophie said they're to thank you for making everything right again." I smiled. I didn't make anything right. I just stopped standing in the wrong place. He chuckled. "Same thing, isn't it?" Maybe it was. We sat there a while, the night deepening, crickets beginning their quiet chorus. Then Ethan turned to me, his voice lower. "I've been thinking, Dad, about everything. About Mom. About what we lost and what we found again." He paused. "I don't want to repeat your story, the loneliness, the silence. I want my kids to know that love isn't about control or guilt. It's about presence." I looked at him for a long time. His face, lit by the lanterns, looked older, steadier, finally his own. "You already broke the cycle, son," I said. "You learned that strength doesn't mean staying quiet. It means standing tall, even when it's hard." He nodded, eyes glistening. "Thank you for never giving up on me." I smiled faintly. "You can't give up on what carries your name." After he left, I went inside and opened the drawer in my desk. Inside was a small wooden box, polished, simple, made from the same oak as Margaret's favorite chair. I'd carved it months ago, but hadn't touched it since. Tonight felt right. Inside, I placed 3 things. Margaret's photograph, Ethan's first drawing from when he was 6, a crooked house with a giant sun, and the letter I'd been writing in my head for years. I took a deep breath and began to write. "My dearest Margaret, it's been a long road since you left. Our boy stumbled, as we knew he would, but he found his way again. The children laugh like you used to, freely and without fear. The house across the street, the one that once broke my heart, now glows like a second sunrise every evening. I thought revenge would heal me. It didn't. It just filled the silence with noise. But rebuilding, forgiving, that's what truly mended what was left of me. You'd laugh if you saw me now. An old man drinking tea under a treehouse, watching his grandchildren chase fireflies. I finally built the piece you always dreamed of, brick by brick, the same way we built our life together. And if you can hear me, wherever you are, know this. I'm not angry anymore. I'm grateful. Because losing everything taught me that love, once given, never truly leaves. It just changes homes. Always yours, Robert." I folded the letter, placed it inside the box, and closed the lid gently. Then I carried it out to the porch and set it on the small table beside me. The lanterns across the street flickered, their light reflecting off the glass windows like stars finding their way home. The air was cool, peaceful. I whispered into the wind, "She'd be proud of you, Margaret. Of all of us." Somewhere, I like to think, She heard. The porch light buzzed softly above me, its glow steady but fading, not dying, just dimming, like it was ready to rest. I leaned back, the creak of the swing echoing against the night, and looked up at the house I'd rebuilt with my own 2 hands. Every scar, every board, every beam told the same story. That dignity doesn't come from what you keep, it comes from what you survive. The maple leaves rustled softly, carrying the last warmth of summer away. I smiled to myself and whispered, "It's enough." Then, for the first time in a very long time, I let the night take over, not as an ending, but as peace finally earned.